Hello, everyone. We might make a bit of a start, I think. I can see that we have most of our students now here. So let's begin. So hello, everyone. Jumripsua. My name is Eva Lloyd, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the UNSW Built Environment Forum on Housing in Rapidly Urbanising Southeast Asian Cities. I would like to start just by saying that this forum is really geared towards our students and in particular those who are currently completing the professional project course. This course is coordinated by Tom Richards from UNSW Built Environment. And the course takes many identities on, and in this iteration, students are investigating affordable housing in the context of rapidly urbanising Cambodian cities. The students in the course partner with Habitat for Humanity, Cambodia, with Sasa Art Projects and New Khmer Architecture. And so what we have in the course and here today is students from architecture, students from urbanism, and also students from interior architecture, from UNSW in Sydney, from the Royal University of Fine Arts in Phnom Penh, from Norton University in Phnom Penh, and also from the Institute of Technology in Phnom Penh. So we're really lucky to have this kind of inter-university and international collaboration, and it's really nice to be able to expand that to all of our guests here today. So we're really lucky to have with us a number of urban humanitarian sector colleagues whose work focuses on housing and on urbanisation in Cambodia and also in the broader region. And what I've asked our guests to discuss today is some insights on challenges that need to be considered and also approaches that we might take in projects such as the ones that our students are working on. What I will do now is just quickly introduce our speakers. So I might just ask that our speakers turn their cameras on if you don't already, and just give a quick wave when I introduce you. So we have Natarun Nyo from the Centre for Khmer Studies. We have Laxman Pereira and also Vanna Sok from UN Habitat Asia Pacific and also UN Habitat in Cambodia. We have Martin Arn from Arn Architect and Associates, and Martin is also a professor at the Royal University of Fine Arts, Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Martin. Great to have you.
Thank you.
We have Lorenz Carpentier, a master's student who actually completed his thesis 2 years ago on waste management in an urban housing project in Phnom Penh.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Laurence. We have Dr. Michael Weibel, who is the joint project lead of the Build for People project. And we have a few speakers. Hi, Michael. We have a few speakers from the Build for People project. I think it's important to note that the project is sponsored by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. So we also have Ravi Jayawira from Build for People, who's a research associate. Hi, Ravi.
Hello. Hi.
And also from Build for People, we have Dr. Anke Bloman. So thank you to all of our guests for being here today. The way that this forum will work is that each of our speakers will give their insights for about 5 minutes, some with slides, some will just talk and engage the audience. And then we have about 30 to 45 minutes for questions and discussion. I'll just ask everyone to maybe to leave on their cameras, but turn off their microphones whilst our speakers present. And just before we officially begin, I'll hand over to Natarun first. We're talking today about urbanisation, we're talking about ideas of community and home and land use. And I think it's really important here that we acknowledge Indigenous peoples of the lands that we're all on. So I would like to acknowledge the Muru Oradil people, who are the traditional Aboriginal custodians of the lands that I now sit on. And I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous communities of the lands that we all sit on today. So, without further ado, I will hand over to Natarun and welcome you all to put questions into the chat as we go, or put your cameras on at the end and we can have a bit of a discussion with faces. Thank you, Natarun.
Yes, thank you, Eva. And first of all, so thank you for inviting me, and very nice to see many familiar faces in the webinar. So hello to all colleagues that I already know or have worked with. What I wanted to do was to maybe share some reflection when we talk about housing and urbanization, and in the Cambodian context. Maybe the first remark is to say that so urban research also, it's not new. It has been already it has started maybe 10 to 15 years ago. Is something that only recently picked up over the last 5 years, and it's an important element to keep into to take into consideration, because we lack a lot data and field information in order to get an accurate picture. The housing sector is indeed a very relevant one, and often one that is captured most often by the private sector, right? When you think about housing, you will think about the major real estate companies, whether those are, the intermediary, the one, the placement, the constructor, etc., etc. The interesting point is that housing is much broader than that. And this is where us at the Center for Khmer Studies, we are interested. We are interested to explore and to push further the other dimension that surround housing and urbanization. As you may all know, as students of urban development, urbanization is complex. It is multi-layered. It's not only about urban planning, but it is also about economic forces that drive, in fact, urban development. And this is a very important point in Cambodia. This is the market that is behind, and you have several markets as well at play. You don't have only a real estate market, and you have different segments within those markets. So 5 minutes is too short, but I'll be happy to kind of develop more on those different elements a bit later, or even at later occasion. So when we say complex systems, we talk as well about the intersection between human systems. So it is important to understand what is the role that social groups and a local culture play when we talk about urban development, when we talk about housing, right? It's not only sufficient to think about, okay, social, different social category, age group, and income groups, right? You need to think as well about the traits that demands people to move and to stay in a place. And it is particularly relevant because as we can see over the past 5 years, one of the macro trends is migration, and especially rural to urban migration, which is in fact one of the drivers across the region. Yes, but what is interesting is that if you look at Thailand, if you look at Singapore, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at Burma, if you look at Laos, each country tells a different story. So what is the story in Cambodia? That is one of the questions that we can try to answer. Another very important element within that urban system is as well the importance of the environment. We talk a lot about climate change, right? We talk a lot about the influence of changing weather patterns and how does that affect infrastructure. But more important than infrastructure, those are the people again, right? So how does the people cope with that, and how does housing solution can help them cope better with that increasing vulnerability? Yes, and this is going to, it's not going to fade away. It's going to get accentuated as we move forward. And This is as well another interesting dimension. So now, to bring that in light of the work that we are doing, as I was saying, we need data. We need a lot, we need to collect data. We need to understand better, the system in which we operate, and therefore we need researchers. So we have started this year 3 projects that relate directly and indirectly to housing. One is a project that focuses on Sihanoukville, and it is to understand basically, we talk a lot about urban transformation in Sihanoukville, and kind of the usual suspect is to say, oh, the Chinese investment, they transform everything, oh, the bad Chinese, etc. So it's a bit of a more complex picture. I think there is a lot of, there's a lot of biases when we think about Sihanoukville. So we are just starting the project, and we hope that after a 3-4 months research, we'll be able to understand better what is happening there. Okay, certainly Chinese investments are playing a role in urban transformation, but there are many other factors at play. The other study that we are doing is in collaboration with the Singapore University of Technology and Design, and we're conducting a perception survey of Phnom Penh residents related to how the city have changed and the role of technology. And as you may know, when you talk about housing, technology start to play a role too. Whether a technology helps you to understand better what is the market available, whether technology help you to locate as well, in a rapid fashion, a housing, respond to a housing need when you have one, when you're a big migrant coming from another city into Phnom Penh or any other Cambodian cities. So that will be one stream of work that may as well connect to housing. And there is a last one that is really focusing on urban vulnerabilities. Often the kind of usual suspect when we talk about urban vulnerabilities are infrastructure-related vulnerabilities, or kind of informal settlements, right? So, poor communities living at the fringe or in specific neighborhoods that hasn't been, taken care of. But there are so many layers and dimension again within urban vulnerabilities. And there is no as well consensus or no approach in terms of how, no understanding in terms of how do we measure that? How, when we talk about urban vulnerability, what it is exactly? So we are kind of starting a discussion on that as well with a group of researchers, and housing is part of it as well. And part of this, when we think about vulnerability and housing, the kind of, again, usual suspect is affordable housing, right? Or low-cost housing. And one very important element, because what matters to us is inclusive development, right? Urban development for all. So when we think about that and we talk about affordable housing, what do we even mean in Cambodia? What is affordable? Is it from the supply perspective? Is it from the demand perspective? How is the financial market helping this kind of outreach to affordable and low-cost housing? All those are very important questions to ask when we think about the issues. I'm going to stop there because I could continue for very long, and I don't want to do that in respect of all the other speakers. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natarun. We're going to move on directly to our next speaker and then hopefully connect the dots through a bigger discussion at the end. So I'd like to hand over now to Laxman Pereira from UN Habitat Asia Pacific Office.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
We can, Laxman.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting for this discussion. And I hope that my colleague also, Wana Sok from Cambodia, must have joined. But let me put it more on a very important 5 points that when we talk about the housing and urbanization, and what are the key elements that we need to look at. It is, one is the policy environment. The number 2 is the demand and supply in the housing industry itself. And the number 3 is affordability. And then number 4 is inclusion and exclusion. Number 5 is the financing products in the housing sector. So if I go back to the policy environment, I think the Cambodia has got a national housing policy, which was, if I remember correctly, I think it was in 2014. At the same time, there is a national level housing department, which is basically trying to implement the housing policy and also try to build up the partnership network with nationally and globally, and also working with the cities. That's one. With the scale of implementation is a question, but at least there is a policy which it's a platform that everybody can come in. And when it comes to the demand and supply, then we know that Cambodia is trying to graduate it to the low middle income country, and there is a huge urban migration, and the transformation from rural to urban is happening. So at the same time, the demand for housing in the urban sector is increasing rapidly. But at the same time, in the absence of larger national programs on social housing, and at the national and subnational level, there is also the supply gap, which is basically towards the low income and vulnerable groups. So there is a huge demand, but at the same time, the supply is largely at the higher level upmarket and also upper middle income, that kind of categories, because of the investment is largely coming from the private sector. And then when it comes to the affordability, again, there is a huge income disparity in Cambodia, and also the people who are migrating to urban is always not having the investment capacity, the capital investment capacity. So there's a gap in terms of investment capacity from the people who are coming to the cities, because they are mostly coming from rural areas to urban, looking for employment and other opportunities. So then when it comes to the inclusion and exclusion, again, there are areas that need to look at. One is the inclusion, how far that is going on, because there are areas within the law and also within the regulatory framework. Sometimes the inclusive approach is not happening in the cities. At the same time, the exclusion happens, it's automatically because the housing sector is largely driven by the market forces and the private sector investment, smaller and bigger. So the inclusion and exclusion, there is a gap, and also the vulnerable groups are mostly excluded most of the time. But there are certain initiatives in the recent past when it comes to the urban sector development, where the development-induced displays happen. There are certain amount of concentration and from the civil society and also from the government that they need to look at the housing sector for the informal settlements. And then finance products, I think that is the most crucial, because the large number of urban sector informal settlers and people who are living in informal settlements, and also the lower income groups, are basically relying on informal sector work, where their income levels are basically is changing, and it's seasonal sometimes, and also there is no regular kind of fixed income categories for those people. So that provides a little bit of not little, it's a significant barrier to access to the finance products, especially housing credit facilities, which requires quite a lot of the required to fulfill the financial institutional requirements, such as collateral for housing loans, the income certification and those kind of things. So because of that, there are gaps in terms of price, which is basically expensive for low income and vulnerable groups. The other is regulations are not adequate enough or adequately implement to include all vulnerable groups into the housing. But of course, there are certain efforts by the different groups, civil society organizations, INGOs, and also the government. And then the other gap is access to finance. So I stop at this point, and I hope that I have not exceeded my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Laxman. It's really interesting, I think, linking Natarun's discussion of complexity to the gaps that you're bringing up across those layers that I think Natarun started to talk about. So we look forward to hearing more about this. And we now have someone from practice. So Martin Ahn, I'll hand over to you here from architecture practice.
Okay, can you all hear me? I hope you can also see the screen. Is it all working?
Yes, that's working.
So good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, good morning, depending where you are. So from a bit of an overview and understanding the forces behind the topic, I chose to go very close to the design process of settlement, especially for the urban poor. And it relates probably much more to the project that the students will be working on for Battambang than the one in Choi Chumba, but I hope nevertheless it will be helpful. There's 7 principles that I would call them, and of course there are many more, and this is just a selection, this is not exhaustive. I would like to illustrate with a project we did, or a project proposal we did 2 years ago for the Affordable Housing Design Challenge for the Phnom Penh Special Economic Zone in collaboration with UN Development Program and Building Trust International. It is at the periphery of Phnom Penh. It lays just at the border of Phnom Penh to the neighboring province. It's actually currently still in a very rural area. A little bit of a backdrop before we go in, and that's maybe more interesting for the Cambodian students as the Australian students, as the Cambodians are very familiar with it, but still a lot of urban poor live in extremely difficult conditions in terms of fresh air, in terms of value, respect given to them by their housing situation, in respect to daylight and so on. Compared to the traditional housing, this one is now a bit of a posh one, but the traditional housing in the Cambodian countryside that have been here over hundreds of years, we can see a huge discrepancy. All the 7 principles that I will go through now and illustrate with that reference project actually are very well addressed in the traditional housing we have seen over centuries. First principle, and there is no specific order, but the first one is the economical and sustainable aspect. For low-cost housing, it is extremely important that we consider how we want to build it in order to drive costs down. If housing is done in a small scale, this might be less of an importance, but since in Cambodia we are looking into rolling out a huge amount of houses, prefabrication would definitely be a factor that could help to drive costs down and actually quality up. That doesn't mean it has to be imported, but factories could be set up near the site, or it could even be a central factory that delivers parts or even total units to the entire country. The settlement that we proposed was for 3,000 units. That means roughly for about 10,000 inhabitants. The concept we picked was a kind of a container concept, but a container that we designed for this specific project. a steel frame, which at the end of its lifespan could easily be reused, recycled, with a filling of natural material locally sourced. Bamboo as a mesh, as a support, as a reinforcement of the wall, and natural clay or earth walls as a filling. This has a lot of benefits in terms of fire safety, in terms of humidity regulation, in terms of sound transmission. And yet, at the end of its lifespan, these fillings can basically be are all degradable, or the earth can go back to the land, to the earth. A very low gray energy, except for the steel frame, which, as I said, can be recycled at the end of its lifespan. Number two is the strengthening of identity. The housing for the poor in cities, and especially here in Phnom Penh, is not just in terms of its difficult aspects a problem, but definitely also in terms of the identity it gives to its citizens. And when we build cheaply, or let's say for low budgets, we have to pay a high attention to the expression of the place. What identity will the citizen, the owner of the building, or the tenant have when he goes there, when he talks about his place? So the reflection of his accommodation. In regards to this topic, we try to avoid this kind of degrading of such a community by arranging houses in a way that you have enough unity, by using also due to the serial fabrication regularity, a lot of sameness, but yet by the order of these buildings, even the levels are not on the same level, so you create a lot of space that is individual. Every court is different, and every house has a different outlook, a different view. That, of course, in addition to the balcony areas that every tenant or owner could decorate as it would please him. Number three is nurturing a community. It is important, I believe, or we believe in our office, that when we set up low-cost housing, that we do not lose focus on supporting the healthy development of a community. And aspects of it, I mean, here, this is the floor plan of one unit, and we can see that a large part of it is actually a veranda space, which is semi-public. I say semi-public because it's only accessible for the community that lives on the same floor. So these are maybe 8 to 12 units. The inner space is extremely limited to bring down the cost, but the inner space, especially the living space, which is elevated from the ground here on the left side, the inner space can be opened up to this outer space, which gives kind of an enlargement of the private unit. On the other hand, it gives a connection, like in a Khmer house in the countryside, where people sit on the bed under the building and connect to what is happening along the road, connect to neighborhood. When we go further down, then we come to the public space, which is much busier and much more is happening. But on that level here, we have the very private space, which is in the back of the unit, the semi-private space, which depends on how you open it, and then that semi-public space, which is the veranda. This is how it looks. So from this space, ideally, these buildings would not be higher than about 4 floors. You have still a good connection to the courts on the ground, but you have here a connection and life, and especially also space for all the elderly people as well as kids to live around the apartments that are extremely restricted in terms of space. Number 4, forming of clusters. It is important, in my view, to make sure that when we set up larger areas, that these areas contain services of different nature, in order that the cluster itself almost becomes self-reliant. So in this case here, we have a market integrated. We have we have, let me see, we have some open spaces that are still covered for different other activities that can be sporadic. We have a community hall here in the center. We have a school here, as well as a kinder care further up. Let me see where it is. Oh, I think here. We have workshops where people could rent the space to produce there, to sell. So the whole ground floor becomes like a village by itself. That doesn't mean that they will be totally isolated from the rest of the city, but it means that within this place, it is not pure residential area, and yet the whole commercial activity on the ground will not interfere in a rather a quiet place where you can retreat when you need your rest. This is how it looks from the ground, where you have a whole town that is alive. It's the market actually on our very left side. Shops, food opportunities at different places, as well as some car parking. Then further up on a mezzanine, a secure bicycle and motorbike parking, and then the large verandas start with all the units attached on the upper stories. Number 5 is climate sensitive design. If we want to, this actually taps into the economical aspect again. If we want to build houses that can work in this climate without air conditioning, then we definitely need to pay very strong attention to the climate responsive design. One point is the allowance for wind to go through a settlement, to try not to block the wind completely with the way we arrange the buildings, with the way we set up the settlement, even though it might be dense, that we leave gaps open. And on the other hand, it's of course, and that's what we reached here with the large verandas, is shading as well as protection from rain. Night cooling is another point. Number 6, connection to nature. Not so much a little bit green here and a little bit green there, but really trying to incorporate nature either in a whole settlement, or like in our case, since we have the luxury to have a river next door, next door with an extreme rich river bench, it was important to us, especially because of the high density, that we keep the spaces open, that almost from everywhere people can filter through the settlement into that green belt and enjoy that balance that it gives to the dense development. This is how it looks from above. And then the last point, number 7, is the connection to a larger context, so that we don't create ghettos where all the like-minded people are all living together. That, of course, would be another aspect of considering a better mix, which was not possible in this case. But important is to connect those classes well with the rest of the city, or the rest with in this case also with the countryside. So one proposal was to have an internal bus that brings people to their workplaces in the factories that are popping up nearby in this zone, as well as bringing people back to the city or here to the railway station. Another element is this new bridge here that connects this part with a rural area on the other side of the river in the next province. In a more urban context, in the inner city, this would of course be, instead of just roads, this would also be bicycle and walkway connections to other areas in the city, whether these are schools nearby, whether these are shopping markets nearby, and so on, or cultural places or recreational places. These were the 7 principles, and that's all from my side for now. Thanks for your attention. Hope it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely helpful. And it's really interesting to hear from an architectural perspective, and for the students to think about, well, how do you connect these forces that were talked about by Laxman and Natarun to the sort of end of the line, the buildings? and the communities and neighbourhoods that are being set up. So I look forward to connecting some of those dots. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
We now have Lorenz Carpentier.
Yes. Hello, everybody. So I'm also going to share my screen. Can everybody see it? Okay. I hope I can also contribute a little bit to the whole of your PowerPoint and everything. So my master thesis for the Belgian School of Architecture went on how can policymakers benefit for informal actor involvement to develop a sustainable waste management for the city of Sreesefon. It was not for Cambodia, but it was for Sreesefon, which is located in the northeast of Cambodia. So you can see it here on the map. And it's a city that is rapidly developing the last 5 years, which is due to a new railway line that is constructed, which connects Bangkok in Thailand to Phnom Penh and also Battambang. So the city itself is rapidly expanding. There are many housing problems, also a lot of refugees from rural areas that are coming to the city. But you also have a lot of investors. Many of them are Chinese investors that are actually putting on land grabbing. So they're buying up a lot of pieces of the land in the center of the city to develop economically, which also puts the housing prices of the city up. So my master thesis went on waste management, and at this point in Cambodia and most parts of the world, we have a linear waste economy. So that is, you have your waste, you throw it away, and it's mostly deposited. We're trying to create a new circular economy, and to have a circular economy, we have to look at some aspects. We have to look at market trends and conditions in the city itself, which can be imposed in Phnom Penh, which can be imposed everywhere, in Battambang also. So we have to look at the market trends and conditions, also at the competitiveness and productivity, the political aspect, the education of the people in the city itself, and the learning culture. In Sreesefon itself, you have a lot of foreign investors, competitiveness and productivity. You have a lot of entrepreneurial skills and a lot of skillful workers there. In the city itself, you have a lot of land grabbing itself. So this forms an issue for the city's development. In education, you have now a new school system. There are a lot of there's now 2 universities that is started in the city itself, and the learning culture. You have a lot of people that are still afraid, and how can I say it? In Belgium, it's a different way of teaching. So for me, it was a kind of a different approach on learning how to collaborate with them. So putting those challenges and opportunities into analysis, we went to Cambodia for a summer school for 3 months, and we talked to a lot of people from informal housing settlements. We try to analyze how they live, what they do for labor, for free time, everything. We investigated, we put it in a methodology. I also put it in an analysis flow. So we see the formal and informal analysis on how waste is collected in the city. So you have the formal waste collection, which is done by Gaia, but that only provides 5% of the waste collection in the city itself. 95% of the waste ends up by the people, they burn it up, or you have waste collectors that are informal settlers, and they collect the waste from the streets itself. They collect it underneath their housing, and when the prices for materials like metals go up, they sell it in a big portion. You also have a landfill itself, but you see it is not a very stable. Landfill is put it outside of the city. You see the rural agricultural lands surrounding it. The rice fields in the rain season, the water level gets up, so a lot of the waste leaps into the rice fields, which also is bad for the agricultural lands. So this is a small scheme. So from the waste, domestic waste, not collected by Gaia, goes to informal settlers, and they have in the city a small recycle center called Simkim, which collects the waste. And actually, they do not have any circular economy itself. All the waste gets transported to Thailand, where they recycle it. So that's also an opportunity for Cambodia itself. So this is a scheme what I made from the content of the waste. So I put in my question, the analysis and how I can approach the problem. So we have the social aspect, the spatial aspect, and financial aspect. Social aspect is I want to put those the people that collect the waste recognition by the government itself. The spatial aspect is I want to create a door-to-door waste collection corporation. And the financial aspect is a private-public partnership. So you see, as most of parts of the world, the recycling profit pyramid, you have the waste pickers that done the most of the work, but the traders itself that collect the waste, that buys the waste of the waste pickers, sells them to Thailand themselves, they extract most of the money out of the waste collection. So that's why I wanted to create with those waste pickers a door-to-door waste collection. By integrating them in their neighborhoods themselves, they get a sort of recognition, and they also they get a recognition by themselves. But you also need the support of the government, because the government does not. They do not see them as real jobs. So you need to create a recognition for that. Then when you give a recognition to those people themselves, you give a voice to the waste pickers, and the waste pickers can participate. And you also have participation by stakeholders. So that's also by the people in the neighborhoods themselves working. This is also another scheme for it. So you have the waste, the collection, and the process. You have the municipality that gives flexible policy and contracts to them. You have the community that is supporting them by direct fee collection or separation of waste. You have the education that gives a project implementation, operation, and also awareness campaigns. And then you have the formal waste collection that still must also be a part of it. So these were two examples put forward in Stresophone itself. You have the organic waste that is collected. The organic waste is the largest part of the waste collection in the city itself, which can be composted in decentralized compost facilities. And this organic matter can be used in the agricultural lands surrounding the city, because with rainfall becoming less frequent, organic matter can hold up moisture a longer time, so which is more safe for rice rice agriculture. And this also stimulates the city waste, the city region perspective, which is a link between the city and the agricultural land surrounding it. And the other part is the inorganic waste collection, which is also in decentralized facilities, which helps the people, the waste managers itself, to collect the waste and get a fair price of it from those organizations, and maybe recycle it in Cambodia itself, not transporting it to Thailand, and creating a more holistic approach to economy. So we have a door-to-door waste collection, which has a public-private partnership, recognition and protection, development by educational city labs that gives a sort of a stable economy. So this is the holistic scheme. Okay. I tried to wrap it up a little bit because otherwise it was half an hour. So I tried to do it very short. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Lorenz. I think it's really important for the students to hear about this project because we need to think beyond the buildings. And you know, it's important to think about those formal systems, the informal systems, and the real importance of relationships. I mean, this is idealistic. I'd love to know how we do this, but relationships between private and public sector, between communities and local government and national government, you know, so much hinges on those relationships, but they're not always possible.
No, of course.
But thank you for sharing your project with us.
No problem.
We are now going to Dr. Michael Wabel from Build for People. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for providing me with this opportunity to present at this interesting forum. I would like to present our project called Build for People, Sustainable Buildings for People, Enhancing Urban Quality of Life in Cambodia. It's a long-term project funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Actually, we just got granted another research phase lasting for 4 years called Research and Development Phase. And let me switch to the next slide. And I think the special thing about our project is that we have a multidisciplinary, people-led approach, working together with 4 universities and 2 companies from the German side. The Hamburg University is leading that research team with a work package on coordination represented by me and a work package called Sustainable Urban Transformation. The research associate Ravi will present about the approach of sustainable urban transformation later on. But we have also a work package from colleagues from environmental psychology. That's particularly important for us because I really want to lay the foundation for a people-oriented approach by including the people's opinions on the environment. And Anke later on will present about the perspective from environmental psychology. Local research partners are the Royal University of Phnom Penh, Panasastra University of Cambodia, and Royal University of Agriculture. But we also work together with local companies, green infrastructure solutions and urban living solutions. Our main project management partner is the Cambodian Institute of Urban Studies. And very important, we not only do desktop research, we work together with implementation partners, most important of all, Phnom Penh Capital Administration. Naratun mentioned that the urban system is a complex system, a multi-layered system, and there are particularly important in the case of Cambodia, market forces, which are very strong. And by means of that project, I think we can provide evidenced data and provide more valid information to support decisions to promote sustainable buildings and sustainable urbanization. The leading analytical and normative bracket of our approach is always urban quality of life, which we intensively discuss and try to conceptualize and model. What we have done so far in the definition phase, lasting for 18 months, for example, we did a lot of dissemination work. We developed an exhibition about green buildings and sustainable neighborhoods to provide knowledge, also with case studies from Europe and Germany. This exhibition has recently been translated into Khmer language and will be shown soon as at an event, among others, at organized by the European Chamber of Commerce. We supported the publication of an architectural guide, Phnom Penh, and also its translation into Khmer language to disseminate knowledge about climate-sensitive architecture and good building and urban design. And of course, we organize workshops at our research partners. For example, a workshop about urban quality of life held in March 2020 at the Royal University of Phnom Penh. Maybe the most important event so far has been a so-called Eco-City Transition Lab held in the course of 1 week in a meeting room at Phnom Penh City Hall. We brought together many stakeholders involved into urban planning and sustainable buildings and tried to provide alternatives to the conventional urban planning design, away from the purely profit-driven urban planning by big developer companies such as Peng Huot. Of course, their urban planning maybe is better than average, but still, in our opinion, there are many other ways to make urban planning and buildings more inclusive, more environmental friendly, and more space effective. If you are more interested in this kind of Eco-City Transition Lab, you can look at a clip we published at YouTube and at our Build for People YouTube channel. Last but not least, I would like to give an outlook into our research and development phase. We plan many outcomes following a specific research design with analytical phase at the beginning of our research, an action research phase where we communicate our research result in the sense of evidence, contribute to evidence-based decision making, to local decision makers, implementation partners such as the Phnom Penh Capital Administration, but we also try to have a view on the corporate sector and try to enable local green architects to develop business models by means of a sustainable building incubator. We try to have a broad view on the stakeholder landscape by initiating a so-called sustainable building arena. And of course, we also continue our series of Eco-City Transition Labs to provide sustainable construction and urban planning alternatives. I don't want to go into more into detail right now. My colleagues Ravi and Anke will explain more about specific approaches of the different work packages. Until now, thanks a lot for your attention. And if you have any ideas to support us, you're warmly welcome to get in touch with our team. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go straight to Ravi Jayawira now, and then on to Dr. Anke.
All right. Can you see my screen already?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so as Michael has already mentioned, I'm working for the work package Sustainable Urban Transformation within the Build for People project, and there we are looking at the built environment of Phnom Penh from an urban transitions perspective. And doing so, we ask how transformative and collaborative governance approaches can be developed, employed, and analyzed in Phnom Penh to support processes of urban and sectoral change towards sustainability. And we do so for the obvious reasons of the strong urban growth dynamic, the ongoing construction boom, the significant environmental effects of these activities in the built environment sector, the long lifespan, the long path dependencies that are also associated with these kind of dynamics. And we're using this transition studies framework because we believe that it is a well-suited approach to understand how change occurs in the ways societal functions are fulfilled. And this framework locates the construction and urban development sector in this gray meso level here you can see. And this graph depicts the way in which different factors, such as sectoral policies, skills of the workforce, consumer preferences, are defining the current sector and socio-technical system of the construction and urban development sector. And it conceptualizes then external pressure, like external dynamics, such as, I think Nataruna has mentioned it already, migration or climate change, to be putting pressure on that system from the outside. And then on a third level, the green one at the bottom, there are small networks of actors or spaces in which innovative solutions are developed, and change is then understood to, transformative change is then understood to occur when internal contradictions between the sectoral factors, external pressure, and innovative solutions are coinciding. And to go into that, so we are currently analyzing the present socio-technical system in order to develop strategies and governance approaches for possible transition pathways. And doing so, we have conducted the first round of interviews in the past, or in this year, and I've collected a few recurring themes here on this slide, where they touch upon many aspects that have been mentioned already by the previous speakers. So one key aspect has been the regulatory side of the sector, which involves both the general existence of regulation, so there's a limited regulation within the sector, but then on the other hand also the enforcement of that existing regulation. This has been connected to a lack of capacity and power of subnational administrations, including the Phnom Penh city administration, but also the lower levels. Then there's the question of the finance capital that's flowing into the built environment in Phnom Penh. So as mentioned already by others, this is considered to be profit-driven mainly and having a short-term investment outlook. So there's little concern for sustainability considerations. And this is connected also to the deterrent effects of at least the perceived additional costs for sustainable building practices, or at least the additional costs in the short term, which are often occurring. Then this is also connected to the absence of financial incentives or incentives in general for the implementation of such sustainable building practices. And another theme has been the disjointed nature of markets, of supply chains, but also then of the governance landscape. And this also includes, according to a number of interviewees, a lack of platform for exchange between sustainability-minded actors, and also slow institutionalization processes within the green building sector. And all of this is part of the system analysis we are currently conducting, and we will develop in the coming year to get an in-depth understanding. And we want to implement a sustainable building arena, as Michael has already mentioned, based on these insights. And there we want to work together with various stakeholders, but primarily also with so-called front runners or change agents and sustainability-oriented incumbents to work together on a participatory problem framing or challenge framing. We want to develop a common vision and a transition agenda. And yes, and based on that, as Michael has also mentioned already, another forum that we want to work on is that of a sustainable building incubator. There we want to tap into the local entrepreneurial ecosystem of Phnom Penh. We are cooperating there with the Impact Hub Phnom Penh, and yes, together with people from the startup scene or generally interested communities, we want to give support to early stage local entrepreneurs, but also develop some sustainable business cases together with them. Yes, and this shall then lead to another sustainable building arena where we want to update and validate the framings and visions and agendas, and finally implement some transformatory experiments. And yes, hopefully we will meet again on that journey in the upcoming 4 years. So thank you. So this is it from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ravi. And yes, we absolutely hope to meet again. We'll hand over now to Dr. Anke Blaumann, who's also from Build for People. And then we'll have time for questions. So I just prompt people, if you do have questions, you can pop them into the chat and I'll moderate that at the end of this discussion.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. So I am from the work package 1, behavior change, out from the Build for People project, and I'm an environmental psychologist. And maybe because environmental psychology is not so very popular, I would like to give a very short introduction. So environmental psychology is mainly dealing with the effects of natural and built environments on mood and behavior of people. So we are dealing with the interaction within people and their environments. And we are also focusing on participatory strategies, participatory design, user needs analysis, and also focusing on sustainability behavior. And within the Build for People project, we are focusing on all of these aspects, but I think it would be most interesting to have a closer look on the on this people-environment interaction. So one of the most popular results out from the environmental psychology research is a finding from Ulrich from the 80s, very old, and he figured out that natural environments have a very restorative effect on people, and he was doing some investigation in hospitals, and he was able to show that natural settings have really a restorative influence and can support recovery, can reduce stressful thoughts and stuff like that. And we have some more recent studies that also support these findings and can show the positive effects of nature on impulse control and emotion regulation for people in their living surroundings. And this is a very general kind of a structure showing something of the interplay and interaction of environments and built environments and people. And what you can see here, that there is really an interaction within the objective urban conditions, crime, transportation, major symphony, stuff like that, and the personal individual differences like noise sensitivity, perceived control, prior dislike of sources, and that there's really an interplay with this. And this comes together to the perception of the city. So it's of interest on the one hand side to analyze the objective factors of the city, and on the other hand, look for the people and how do they perceive the environment. And this kind of structure may be very similar for all of the people all over the world, but of course the objective urban conditions are very different, and also the processes of expectations and needs are of course very different within cultures and different contexts. And on the one hand side, you could have a very positive outcome that people perceive the situation as very positive, the perception of a city as supportive, minimally disruptive, and there is the possibility to adaptation and satisfaction with city life. That would be a very positive situation. And on the other hand, you could have a process of a perception of a city as dangerous, crowded, polluted, noisy, and that may lead to arousal and or to overload and reactance, and that might lead to a very negative outcome. but that there is no need that it has to be this way. So people have the possibility, the option of coping. So people have coping strategies, and these coping strategies can be supported by urban or city structures and environmental aspects as well. And there might be a positive outcome if your coping is successful, that you are able to adapt and adjust to the environment, and there's still a kind of a positive outcome. And on the other hand, there might be a negative or failing coping, and that continues to lead to arousal, stress, possible intensified stress due to inability to cope. And that might lead to possible after effects. And environmental psychology is very much interested to analyze these interplays. And for instance, Martin already mentioned the semi-private spaces and the importance of semi-private spaces. And that reminds me of some findings from the environmental research that also supports the importance of semi-private spaces for good living conditions, for instance. So we have livability on the one hand side as a level of functioning, and we have livability on the other side. That means the psychological functioning, that is the ability to achieve goals within oneself and the external environment. So is it just environment? So socioeconomical disadvantaged groups are especially affected by physical factors. So for them, the designed environment is much more important maybe than to other non-so vulnerable groups, and also such as an impact of climate change on the urban environment. And lack of these resources and a lower degree of freedom means less opportunities to design the residential environments, and is very often associated with lower possibilities for coping, for instance. And so we are, and public resources like public urban green, public recreation areas become more important for these groups. And so low-income residents especially profit from the greener environments, for instance. And we are trying to integrate those aspects to support suggestions for urban planning processes. So environmental psychologists, of course, are no architects, and we are not planning, but we're trying to support ideas for planning. So what are we doing within the Build for People project? We are doing some household surveys, asking for the assessment of objective factors as for climate, public green, or the built environment, and asking for internal versus external locus of control, for environmental stress, for coping skills, and also for demands for housing, for place identity and attachment. And of course, we're asking for gender, income, norms, and values as well. And in addition, we are conducting some focus groups addressing expected conflicts. We will expect these conflicts within individual demands concerning personal quality of life and maybe social norms of sustainable lifestyles. And in the end of the Build for People project, we are trying to design an awareness campaign addressing sustainable lifestyles and sustainable housing together with our colleagues from all the other work packages of the Build for People project. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anke. That was a great one to end on. I think because at the core of the project that the students are working on, and really what we're all talking about, is a kind of people-focused approach to what we do. So it was nice to think about that through the lens of environmental psychology. Thank you. We have a little bit of time now, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and I can stay on longer for anyone who'd like to continue for some questions and discussion. And I can see that I have a couple of comments here, so I'll start with those. And again, please feel free to interrupt, jump in a really informal manner. Okay, so we have a question here from Sarah McDonald, who was one of our students last year and has joined again this year. And this is to you, Martin. Martin, I really like the idea that prefabrication does not inherently mean imported products and materials. Do you think that Cambodia at present has capacity to supply prefabricated buildings to meet demand? What more should or could be done to promote this? And what do you think this would look like in terms of material and construction?
The industry is not yet in that regard really developed to that standard. And I think they are producing larger concrete elements which are not really sustainable, huge energy behind it. But we are in touch with somebody who is considering to plant bamboo in large scale and then produce a semi-industrial product made of bamboo that can be easily used for housing. It doesn't need to look like a standard bamboo house, which comes with a lot of problems, but industrial products made of bamboo would be an extreme advance in that area. So there is still, in terms of availability of material, I think that's not an issue. In terms of availability of the industrial capacity to produce it, there is still a way to go. But I think first there's a need of a clear plan, and then industry can be built up relatively fast here. It needs to be financially viable so that investors are happy to invest into it. But I believe the production of such products doesn't require very high skills, and therefore I think it's not an issue to produce here.
Thanks, Martin.
You're welcome.
Michael, you had a similar question there about the existence of an industry that supports prefabricated elements. And you say, and if there's not one, how might we promote this? How has the Build for People project investigated this area, and what can you see as the blockages? I think you're on mute, Michael. Michael, I think you might be on mute. Take two.
So, our colleagues from Stuttgart University, civil engineers, have investigated that aspect a little bit deeper, but according to my knowledge, I would join Martin's opinion that there's not a lot of capacity yet in terms of prefabricated construction materials. That's why I would that's why I asked Kim if he has maybe more information on that.
I don't have more information than what I just mentioned, but a Frenchman, Yvan Calme, he is currently setting up a factory, and they are starting to produce elements. I mean, that the container system that I just presented is likely, this could likely be produced here. And for instance, for these 3,000 units, it would have been very feasible to set up a factory just next door. I mean, in Cambodia, that doesn't take too much to set up a big enough space to produce this. Steel would definitely still be imported at this point of time. And all the other material that we proposed are local, so that's already available. And having people trained in assemble them would have not been an impossible task. As soon as we go to semi-industrial industrial products like those bamboo industrial boards, maybe 4 or 5 centimeters thick, in order to make walls out of it, that would take different machines, and that would require much higher investment. But the project that I presented would not be very difficult to set up in a very short period. If we want to go on to make prefabrication much more sophisticated, I mean, almost like the car industry, then I would say Cambodia is still far away from it, and the skilled labor is hard to find, and it's not sure whether people would be willing to invest so much in a plant. But I think we need to start with very, very simple prefabrication methods, which is totally possible.
Eva, if you allow me to add as well on that. So actually, there are a few players in Cambodia that produce, for example, eco bricks. So I don't know if Martin, you know Kong Ni Hav. Have you heard of him? Kong Ni Hav is a Cambodian.
The name sounds familiar, but what is he doing?
So basically, it's a bit of a innovation. So they're producing kind of bricks that are not, they're made of biodegradable materials that are recyclable, but they're of course resistant, because you don't want, if you build a house with those bricks, that the house disintegrates in after 3 or 4 years. So, but he built a production line, and he has already been supplying to, for example, Brown. Yeah, so the architects from Brown. So he's part of the, let's say, entrepreneurial space. So those young Cambodian entrepreneurs that are putting ideas into fruition. And the good thing about Kong Ni is that he already, so he market tested his model, because he got a positive response. He scaled up his supply, and therefore the question is really about to what extent the market is ready to pick up, right? So that's one element. When we talk about prefabricated materials, which elements are we talking about? Again, what is the volume of absorption that the market can take? So that's an important element. The other element is as well maybe about the market regulations, because, okay, so if you talk about, bricks and those type of materials, you have already kind of, norm and standards, so to speak, and you know that much better than me. But for those innovative materials, what will there be any licensing, etc., fireproofing, and so on and so forth? I don't know. Another interesting element is, so you have the entrepreneurs. I would disagree in terms of skills are not there. Skills need to be built, basically, and many industries in Cambodia have invested. So let me take a simple example. Mini Beer, they're quite famous Japanese company working on micro motors, so all the motors that you have to have your phone vibrate. This is Mini Beer producing that in a factory now around the special economic zone in Sihanoukville. They started from scratch. At the time, there is no Cambodian that would have been skilled in assembling electronic components, but they invested in those Cambodians and then give a viability, and created a market. I mean, not created a market, because the market is mainly, for foreign buyers, but they kind of scaled up the skills, also the local human capital, one level up. So therefore, it requires an effort from investors, right, to come and do that. And there is a part of risk. And I'm not going to open this, because it's a whole other discussion. But it's really about as well what we call impact investing. When we talk about investment today, people would think, okay, massive investment in road infrastructures, but there's a lot of other niches that have a market viability. And maybe affordable housing could become one of those niches, right? And the question is really about, at the end, okay, how you generate enough volume, to bring down the manufacturing cost and make it affordable, so that your house at the end doesn't cost more than, a standard terre levain, for example. Thank you.
Can you maybe say what's the brand of the product that Kong Ni Hav is producing?
Yeah, I think I can share that with you later if you want, Martin. I think actually we never met directly, but we know a lot of people in common. So his company at that time, it was 2 or 3 years ago, or even more than that, actually 4 years ago. So I don't know if he changed it, but it was called My Dream Home when he created it, and he's still on the market. So he's sustainable, but now what he has become, and the type of product he has diversified in, and if he kept the same branding, I don't know. But I can put you in touch. Yeah, if you want, if you're interested. Yeah.
Much appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you very much there. I've just shared it with the students as well in the chat. We have a couple of questions from our students, and I might ask the students to pop their cameras on. We have one from Sal and one from Anya. And they're leading on kind of further into this discussion about the potential for using natural materials when you're an architect. So Sal, would you like to begin?
Should I turn on my camera as well?
That would be great.
Oh my God, I'm so shy.
It's okay.
So wait, I cannot turn on my camera.
That's okay.
But my question concerns Mr. Martin's 7 principles. I'm most interested in how we can use natural materials such as bamboos that are already readily available in Cambodia to promote sustainable housing for the region. As well as that, he also mentioned how we should promote an identity for those who are living in such housing projects that is acceptable to others in the society. But also considering how most Cambodians associate such building materials, such as wood, bamboos and stuff, with poverty and something that is out of fashion. How can we make all those 2 principles coexist?
Can I also add in my question, because it is a follow-on from Vissel's question, which is also, how can we do this as a vernacular use and not just an industrial like prefab, or like how can it be built more accessible, is my point.
Okay, I mean, I'm not sure whether I got all your questions, Vishal, but the main thing there is design is coming in here. We know a lot of prefabrication from the past that went wrong in terms of identity. We know that the communist countries have built a lot of prefabricated buildings for similar reasons, but they had an expression of everything is only pragmatic and there is a missing soul. And we see here on Russian Boulevard, buildings built up in concrete, but not even prefabricated, but it looks like just a cookie clutter. And so the design is a very important factor. If we just use kind of ordinary bamboo structure, this would really give this would reflect a construction that is maybe retro or old-fashioned or rural, and these people would kind of fall out of a modern society. But I'm thinking of not just producing products which are later hidden, but using products which create a contemporary look and a contemporary design, but with a lot of positive effects. So design work will be the key. This is first, Cambodia is in a sense very flexible when it comes to fashion. As long as it's fashionable, people are ready for a move. But if it looks old-fashioned or out of date, then it doesn't help when we say it's very good for the environment or it's very low cost. So I believe when it's low cost, it doesn't need to look low cost, but it still can look very smart. For instance, when I went to Taiwan to Toyo Ito's library in Taipei at the university, they made wonderful bookshelves, everything of bamboo. But when you come in, nobody thinks, oh, this is bamboo. You know, like right now it's bamboo is like somewhere in the jungle and somewhere for holiday makers, some people who want to leave the city. But this was bamboo in the university library, first class, all industrially produced, so very complicated knots, totally Japanese thinking. But it was bamboo after bamboo, like a laminated board, and beautiful shape. And nobody would think of, oh, this looks cheap or it will not last. And this, if the bamboo is, for instance, bamboo is produced properly, it will last for decades. But the way we use bamboo now, it's often a problem that it's a nice idea, but after 5 years, you have a lot of maintenance. I mean, even old, good material that can be grown again, like sabot roof, the thatch roof, is no more a real solution here when we want to cut down on maintenance, which before was not a problem because people had all the time of the world, but they had no money. And now this is changing. So I think their design will become very important. And you know, like for instance, normal ordinary soil, earth walls, for instance, when I go and see projects, I can always see that at the end, it's much more expensive than an ordinary brick wall. And there we need to see a big step forward in order that it becomes truly economical, interesting, but in terms of look, it's not just like something for a very alternative group, which the very poor never can, I mean, the poor has not the mental capacity, I mean, sorry, how is it, the psychological capacity to stand for something that is great, but looks kind of alternative. The poor is rather needs to be accepted in a group. If you have university graduates, they could maybe live in something that looks much more alternative because they define themselves over their intellect, while the poor often defines themselves over their status, over the items that they have. So the houses must look smart, contemporary, and not depraved. And that's possible, I believe.
Thank you so much for your answer.
I mean, let me just add something here. During modern times, we have these pictures in mind from Le Corbusier's house in Stuttgart or so, with the old car in front, and the car was really old-fashioned, but the houses looked super contemporary, very abstract, very modern, everything taken away that we don't need anymore. So some people might also have said it's ugly, but it was really avant-gardistic. But the car industry has developed immensely, and generally with this standardization or with this serial production, you bring cost a lot down. But the way we build buildings nowadays, and especially here, is totally outdated and old-fashioned. So I think there is a huge potential to reduce costs by prefabrication, but not the way it's done before, that you can see this kind of, oh, okay, now I'm a social case, that's why I can only afford a prefabricated house or apartment. Is this answering your question, or have I missed something?
I believe that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anke, would you have a comment on this in terms of, you talked a lot about perception, the way that that culture influences perception. Perhaps Martin's alluding to socioeconomic status influencing perception. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe what came up to my mind as Martin was talking about, how does it look like, and are you related to what kind of social norms are you related? I think it's more a question of yeah, you talked about status, and you want to look like it has it's associated with status. I think it depends on the social norm and the peer group you are in. And so if you think that the people you judge as important for you, or that are similar to yourself, would judge it as ugly, you think it's ugly. And if you think that your peer group will sense it as innovative or more modern, you will sense it as modern as well. So if you want to know about what people think is beautiful or attractive or adorable, you have to look at the peer group they are and what's the social norm of the relevant group around. Yes. And yeah, and once again, if you think about the interaction of people and perception of environments, I think we really have to look at what are the expectation and needs for everyday living for people. So what are they doing in their homes? And Martin already illustrated some examples, and I especially like the ones with the semi-private spaces, because we already know that semi-private spaces have a lot of functions. They are very relevant for regulating your private sphere, because it's something like a border within the private sphere and the public sphere. And it offers a lot of opportunities for communicating with each other and strengthen the neighborhood relationships, because you can talk to others and meet others without the force of letting them into your private spheres. And that was something that I found really interesting from a psychological point of view.
May I add a little something here, if you have time?
If anyone, I'm conscious of time, so please, if anyone needs to leave, it's no problem, and I'm happy to stay.
Okay, I fully agree what you say, Anke. Now, one thing that I think is here very dynamic is the perception and marketing plays here an immense role. So how a product is presented and by whom, by a star, by a singer, by somebody famous that everybody looks up is extremely important. The higher the education, I think the less you are perceptive to any advertisement, but the lower the education, advertisement plays a huge role. I would always say a standard, an average Cambodian would feel an Apple product is super ugly. It's nothing. There's no decor on it. It's just a rectangular thing with round corners and a bit of silver and nothing. But nowadays, there is not one Cambodian who would say an iPhone is not desirable. But the design has nothing to do with when I came to Cambodia, how everything had to look, if it looks luxury or beautiful. Or the iPhone is not golden, maybe some now, but not all. The iPhone has no ornament. But yet it became a symbol of status. And that has to do with what the product stands for, and I guess also with what it stands for. But I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying marketing would definitely be an important factor.
Michael, I think you're on mute.
I would agree that we need more people leading by example. We need more testimonials of a sustainable lifestyle, high-ranking politicians, economic leaders who say, "Oh, I'm very proud, and I live in a fancy, environmental-friendly, climate-sensitive design apartment or house." And then maybe people follow and replicate this example. And I think we need more of this kind of pioneers of sustainable lifestyles and testimonials for sustainability in Cambodia, leading by example.
And if we're talking about marketing and packaging here, something I found a challenge in my work in Cambodia was convincing people who are used to living in a single detached home to live in multi-unit apartments like you're presenting, Martin. And I think this is something the students are dealing with now. So how did you package that in a convincing manner?
I mean, here it was no choice with so many units and so little land, but I have no answer yet. I don't have an answer.
Let's go Michael and then Anke.
Yeah, but looking, for example, at the case of Vietnam, who has maybe spearheading a little bit development happening in Cambodia right now. About 20 years in Vietnam, living in high-rise condominium apartments was very unpopular. It was an unknown concept. And now it's very, very popular. All the new consumers, the middle classes, prefer to live in that kind of residential style. In the upper floors, they have a good degree of natural ventilation. You don't need to put on the AC so much. You have a lot of amenities like a swimming pool and shops on the ground floor. So it has really become a concept which got very popular. And I see in the course of time that this might happen in Cambodia as well if we produce more affordable high-rise living types.
Maybe just to give an additional perspective to Michael's comment. So I would say it may depend as well, because you can see definitely there is a very strong supply of condominiums, but occupancy rate is very low. So the question is, to what extent the market is being created? So it is a push, or is it really like responding to a demand? So there is that element. And still you can see as well in the real estate market that even the middle class, and we would need to define what is the middle class, right? Up, if they have the choice, they would prefer now to go, and this is new actually, to go and live further from the city center in those it's not, I mean, gated community as well needs to be defined, because not all gated community are the same, and they obey to different characteristics, but they would prefer that, which is quite surprising. And therefore there is another element within the choice of a condominium type of goods, which is the market speculation. And so it's quite interesting, you know, to take all those factors into consideration. And when I was saying at the beginning that we still lack the data to really understand exactly what is the market, yeah, I think it would actually be very interesting to do a session with real estate actors, because they are the one, I think, that understand that market the best. I mean, not only them, because I think all of you have as well. We all have our own understanding, but putting that together may you know, lead to very interesting insight. Thank you.
Eva, maybe back to your question. One answer is definitely the price tag. I mean, we were talking here about a unit that costs only maybe 15,000 all inclusive. And I agree with Nataran that most of the Cambodians, not all, but most of them would prefer, if they can, to have their own land, their own house. They don't like to live above each other, especially not under somebody else. And they like the land and not just a house, an apartment. That's also in terms of trust and security. But that's for the class that we catered for. If it's for poor, urban poor, it is just not affordable. So going to up to 4 floors, and now we were forced to go to 5, 6, up to 7 even. But let's say up to 4 floors is an economical reason, and that will bring prices down to, if somebody can take a loan and pay back every month just $80, that is affordable for a factory worker. And after 20 years, it's his or her own apartment. Or if this person goes back to the province where they will have land and where they can live on the ground, at least they have something to sell that has accumulated value over 10 or 20 years. And so people who work in the city, not all, but many of them in the factories are not here forever either. Or maybe they don't think they're here forever. At the end, they might stay. But the price tag, I think, is the main marketing reason for such an apartment.
Mm. I think as well, when you sort of overlay the price tag with bringing some of those principles that Anke was talking about, the semi-private space. So if we imagine the area under the house that you would find in a typical rural house where you're able to be with your family but interact with others, you've emulated that just in a different way, you know, stacked on top of one another through the balcony that you created. So I think you're bringing some of those principles spatially into higher density living.
May I add to that? The price tag, in my opinion, should go in both ways. So from my perspective, the Boé living in the urban periphery is too cheap still, because a lot of costs are externalized to the general society, like emissions. If people have to commute with their private car from the Boé community outside the city to the city center every day, forth and back, the space consumption is pretty high. It's not effectively used. There's a high fragmentation between the gated compound and the surrounding area. There's no connection to that areas. So in fact, from an environmental expenses perspective, living in a Boé is still too cheap, because a lot of costs are externalized to the general public. And in contrast, living in a high-rise environment in the city center is, from an ecological perspective, much better, because then you can realize the city of short ways. You can even walk or take a bicycle or two-wheel transportation. You don't need a car, and so on and so on. So, and this kind of price mechanism has not been fueled into the system until now, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. I have so many more questions I've written down to ask. I feel like we need to have another session here. But I really appreciate all of your insights today. And I urge the students to kind of really embrace the complexity of this. I know that today students have heard from policy, from architects, from waste management, from the perspective of economics, and that is the reality of what you deal with as an architect or in the types of roles of the speakers that are here today. So thank you very much to all of our speakers for sharing your time and thoughts today, and thanks to our students for being here for this session. We really do hope that this is the beginning of more collaborations like this. And I know I can see Tom Richards, who is the convener of this professional placement course, has put his camera on. And these stakeholder engagement sessions are a really important part of our students' learning. So Tom, I'll hand over to you if you'd like to jump in here.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you that have contributed today. What a fantastic session. I've been pretty blown away. I'm not across all the detail like Eva is in terms of Cambodia, but it's given me such a clearer picture as to the challenges that exist in housing and in planning in Phnom Penh. So yeah, what a fantastic mix of speakers. And I think it's given the students a huge amount to reflect on and work with through their projects. So thanks everyone. And nice to meet you all too.
The students will be finishing their internship in a couple of weeks, and we would love to also share their work with you. We'll have some presentations so we can invite you, and we can also, I'll email you their projects. So thanks once again, everyone. A pleasure to see you all. Have a nice morning, day, night, sleep.
Meeting you all. All the best for your project.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Hi, Billy.
Bye. Thank you.
Hi, Dalian. Okun.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye, Visal. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, Emma. Kuchma.
Bye. I was late. I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem.